Everyone, and welcome to Interfaith Paths to Peace. I'm excited to welcome you to our first series of the summer. Every Monday, we're having a series called The Soul of the City, Resources for the Inner Journey. And throughout the summer, on Mondays, we'll be doing a variety of different programs and events to give us different resources, not only for our individual journey inward to cultivate our own soul work, but also what does it mean to do collective soul work as a city? And so we'll have a lot of conversations, different people speaking, looking at different resources. So I encourage you to put it on your calendar every Monday at 3 o'clock, and I think you will enjoy the series. I'm really excited today to start off our series with a conversation on emptiness. This is a really interesting concept. It kind of emerged out of some work that Justin Magnuson was doing with us on Zen meditations. But there was a really beautiful conversation that I thought, well, this needs to go online because there's a lot of beautiful conversation and topics being raised around emptiness. So we have a really great panel of folks that will be speaking from different traditions. First, Geshe Rapgel, who's the executive director with Drepung Gomong Center for Engaged Compassion. He will be speaking from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition first, and then Jason Heiner. Jason is with the Baha'i community, and also they lead a devotional every Saturday with Interfaith Paths to Peace that's just absolutely beautiful. So put that on your calendar as well, to join in the Baha'i community on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock. Then we'll have our own Rabbi Nadia. Rabbi Nadia is coming from the Jewish tradition and has already been busy today doing a prayer with the mayor. And so Rabbi Nadia, we thank you for being on. And then, I'm sorry, Justin will be second. I'm sorry, Justin. Justin Magnuson, who I mentioned earlier, who's coming from the Zen tradition. He'll be second, actually. And then I'll be following up representing the Christian tradition last. So those of you that are joining us on Zoom, welcome. We'll get into the conversation and have plenty of time for you to make comments or questions to our panel. And so we're going to jump in and Geshe Rapgel, if you would join us and talk some about emptiness is the concept that is the most profound, or at least the most articulated, I believe, in the Buddhist tradition. And so we wanted to ask Geshe Rapgel to share with us some about his understanding of emptiness. So Geshe, we'll turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you. And also it is very great honor to see you all. Many of you know his friend. Kanda is a very big gift for this time to see your face. So, it's a very expensive topic, subject is emptiness, but very important. It's very important for this time. The Buddha said, understand is emptiness, kind of highest view of the philosophy of Buddhism, and understand emptiness. Emptiness is not equal to nothingness. Emptiness is equal to non-dependent existence, which is empty of independent. That's kind of whole idea is, definition of emptiness. Empty of independent, which is other side is interdependent. All phenomena and nature and reality is interdependent. That is the meaning of emptiness. we understand this nature and reality of all these phenomena. I mean, it's relationships, it's the reality of phenomena and everything. We have wisdom to understand, interdependent, and thus give us wisdom to open heart. And in Buddhism, the Buddhists, they're talking about compassion and emptiness. Understand emptiness. This, we call this wisdom and method. If you are great practitioner, you have to be practice. The unit is both more the methods and then wisdom. Wisdom which understand emptiness. Example, we have compassion. We have compassion our relationships. We have compassion people who lucky us. We have compassion, who we take care. But that is one just naturally human beings we have method. But then you understand the wisdom, understand the reality, emptiness is open up and make you more and development, you method. Because we know it's no matter if you know the people, no matter if you relationship, because we all interdependent. That is the gift with knowing emptiness, the reality. We all interdependent. We all, it depends each other, our lives. Example, this time we met in here. We have computer. Who made this? We have these old technologies and somebody lead. And this all kind of is, interdependent. It's dependent. We all connected. And each phenomena, what we using and what we eating, what we wearing, and all this is not really, exist independent. It exists interdependent. However, this kind is, the significantly is important to knowing the reality of emptiness or phenomena. And in this case, for Buddhism, the Buddhism is very important to learn and knowing the reality of all phenomena. That is you go deeper, is the who is all phenomena, reality is emptiness. I say again, emptiness is not equal to nothingness. Empty is of independent. They have no any phenomena exist independent. So, and then, the practitioners, when you use the first, we try to learn and understand to development our wisdom to understand emptiness, and then it hopes to development our methods like compassion, and then loving kindness, compassion. And I will be finally going to read the great master, India master, and then, how you practice to unite, to understand wisdom and emptiness and also compassion. And he says here, he says, when you have great wisdom to understand the reality, and then you compassion also can toward all sentient beings. And then you have feeling is we all is connect. We all have equally wandering happiness, don't want to suffer. And then is you will be, take care others more than you take care of yourselves. And then he says here, I should eliminate the suffering of others. The reason is, he says, because it is suffering. We know it's suffering. It's no matter your friend, no matter it's nobody you don't know, because it's suffering. And then it's, it is suffering. Just like in my own suffering. That's his example, just like in my own suffering. And then I should take care of others because they are human beings and sentient beings. It's same. And the reason he says, just as I am a human being, I am the sentient beings. When we know the reality is emptiness and interdependent, and then we have feeling, and this, the qualities is great compassion, loving kindness toward others. And finally, we, as Buddha said, we always say, may all beings have happiness and, and may all beings be free from suffering. These prayers is come from understand the reality and also to development our compassion, human compassion, allowing kindness. I think that's
Yeah. No.
However, yeah.
Thank you. And we'll have some, maybe some time for some questions at the end. But thank you for that presentation, Geshe-la, and for representing that tradition so well in our community. Justin, I want to turn to you now and let you share some from the Zazen Zen tradition about compassion. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to work, see you and work with Rabbi Nadia again. And then there's lots of people that are familiar on the call. So yeah, do you want to pull up my pictures?
I will, yep.
Can you pull up the sky first? So I'm going to try and summarize my my life experience with emptiness in 4 minutes. So the first one is the sky. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to talk a lot about form and function in this. And when I was 3 years old, sometime between my 3rd birthday and the spring of 1980, I started going to church with my parents. And I don't remember the exact Sunday, but I know it was a Sunday because we went to Catholic Mass, and my parents were married that May. So sometime before their wedding, I started going to church. And I remember being a small child, and most people who are Catholic do not remember the first time they go to church unless they convert as an adult. But I converted as a child, and I remember going to church for the first time and just having to come into like all these forms and rituals, a lot of bowing, a lot of singing, and trying to take it all in. And my first experience with emptiness was really looking up at the church ceiling as a small child. And you get this sense of awe and this sense of expansiveness. And really just kind of sitting there and looking up and realizing that there is distance between me and something else. And I use a picture here of the sky because I would often lay out in my backyard as a child and look up at the sky and have that same sense of awe, that same sense of, I am here and there's something else out there. And it just kind of, I remember being stopped by it and just being really intrigued by it. As my life moved on, I did my baptism was about a year later. I remember my baptism, again, another form, you're going into that first sacrament, my sacrament of first communion, going through that, going into my first confession. I remember that pretty well. And so I'm taking on all these forms, and somewhere around the 4th or 5th grade, it stopped making sense to me. That sense of awe, that sense of kind of being curious about things. And I think it was around walking on water. I got into an argument with my Sunday school teacher around walking on water. And I really kind of started to just question everything. And you can turn into my next slide. It started to kind of lead into a sense of cynicism. And here we have the nihilists from Big Lebowski and We Believe in Nothing Lebowski. That was kind of what Geshe-la was hinting at, that sense of emptiness is not nothingness, but it can be part of it. And so for a long time as a teenager, a lot of cynicism and a lot of sort of trying to figure out the world. And I talked about this in our conversation, Judd, for the evolutionaries conversation around the first time I ever laid in Shavasana in yoga class and just feeling like I was like on this bed of tranquility. And it just felt like there was tranquility that went in all directions and through me and out into the world. And it was just, it stopped me. And I started to connect to not just the form of a tradition, but also some of the texture and the essence of it. And I started to kind of recognize that there was a sense of connection between the forms and like an inner sense of transformation that was pretty profound. And I probably spent about 5 or 6 years really studying yoga and really studying the Vedic texts. And in the, I can't speak for that whole tradition, but there is a sense that there is consciousness that is driving the world, that's like directing the world, and there is an individual self. So there's an Atman that is an individual self that is connected to a bigger sense. And I was really really interested in that. And then I went and sat with some Buddhist friends and we chanted the Heart Sutra. And there was a word in there, in a phrase, form is not separate from emptiness. Emptiness is not separate from form. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. And I was like, what does that mean? And they started to explain emptiness to me, and I interpreted it as nothingness. And so my initial response to the Heart Sutra was this sense of kind of revulsion. And I think why this is so important, and this is such a rich conversation for me and Rabbi Nadia when we first started this with Jason, was that we can use this kind of inquiry into these thoughts and into these perceptions and into these concepts to expand out and understand things deeper. And so if you can go to the Inso, you know, my initial revulsion to Buddhism over the sense of nihilism or the sense of nothingness has kind of developed into really developing a relationship with practice, and really developing a relationship with acknowledging the world and trying to figure it out. And this is the traditional Zen symbol, I guess. And when people look at it, it's like, what is this? And to me, it is, you know, it's beautiful on the surface, but I imagine the person that made this Inso taking a brush and ink and making a circle. You have the form that is also within it a sense of emptiness. But there's also the process of doing this over and over again. And so I imagine this person doing this hundreds and hundreds of times and really trying to embody how they approach this with the same awe as a child looking up at a ceiling or looking up at the sky. And so you have this whole life experience that you're trying to bring together into one moment to make this symbol, to make this piece of art. And I really think that that is what emptiness as a concept allows us to do, to see the connection across the lifespan, a connection between people. I'll read just briefly from a different translation of the Heart Sutra that I talked about earlier, where form is not separate from boundlessness. Boundless is not separate from form. Formless boundlessness, boundlessness is form. Feelings, perceptions, inclinations, and discernment are also like this. And I think to connect to emptiness is a sense of boundlessness, and there aren't hard walls around concepts or beliefs that you can expand out and have a relationship with both the concepts within other people. I think that's part of the, I'm hesitant to use the word power, but that's the word that is coming to mind right now, is there is a strength and a flexibility here that we can create relationship. And as Geshe-la was talking about, you know, compassion can spring from this, and relationship can spring from this. And I think that that's really the value of it for me currently. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Justin. Let's keep deepening it. Rabbi Nadia, thank you for being on and representing the Jewish tradition. And you were the one that was kind of evoking this conversation originally. So thanks for being here and continuing it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, it came through our Zazen meditation that was led with Justin, and Jason and I were both there and a few others, and it was an awesome conversation. So what resonated for me, and I'm going to try to speak specifically from the Jewish tradition and the Kabbalistic tradition, is the similarities in and connections between our teachings. So in Judaism, we believe at the very beginning, there was only God, and God was without limit, infinite, and then God wanted to create the world. And so the very first act of creation that God needed to do in order to make space for this world that God wanted to create was to create that space by taking almost like a vacuum, like creating an empty space in order for there to be world and matter. And so then God created world and matter. And that world and matter that went in there, we call in Hebrew matter as yesh, and God is Ein Sof, the one that is without any limits. And the word Ein Sof, that is without any limits, is related to the word ayin, which means nothingness. And even in modern Hebrew, ain means there is none. And so we already see that connection of infiniteness and nothingness. And the very first act of creation was removing of God's self to make that space, to create the matter. And then God infused matter, God's energy into the matter, and infinite energy could not contain finite matter. So there was this massive explosion. The Kabbalists foretold the Big Bang hundreds of years before scientists discovered it. And then God's infinite energy was trapped inside of matter, and it's up to us to liberate it. And this is one of the reasons why there is evil and suffering in this world. So then our Jewish tradition teaches that each of us created in God's image have that capacity for connecting with God. And as God entered into the world, the emptiness, the Ein Sof, the nothingness that is everything that is boundless, the first emanation of God in this world is through wisdom, chokhmah. So we learn that wisdom comes from that emptiness. And since we're created in God's image, we have that same capacity. So when we can realize through meditation, through prayer, through study, through awareness, that our egos, that the things of this world that we call matter are actually what we call yesh, there is, that everything there is, our egos are actually what gets in the way from being able to experience that emptiness that is boundless, that is God. And so the goal of healing that we have all been charged to do is to remove our egos and to be willing to take a step back in order to make space for God's love and energy to flow through. And so that notion of ayin, or emptiness, and that notion of Ein Sof, of boundlessness, certainly is what connected in our conversation. And I wanted to share this reading from Rabbi Dov Ber of Mezrich, who is a Hasidic teacher. One should think of oneself as ayin, and that absolute all and absolute nothingness are the exact same thing. And the person who learns to think about himself as ayin will then ascend to a spiritual world where everything is the same and everything is equal. And so as we look at this world with egos competing and with power and domination and materialism, and we see the suffering that comes from what happens when yesh, matter, gains ascendancy, then our task is to empty ourselves from our need to save face, from our ego, from all of the things that need to control, so that we can truly realize that the only truth is ayin, is God, that infiniteness of God, that emptiness that comes when we are able to see past the illusions of this world. And that's what meditative practice can do. That's also what is supposed to inspire our justice work for healing. And what we see right now going on in our world, as we see the ways in which yesh, ego, power, desire for control, materialism has impeded our ability to have true compassion, which is supposed to be born from the one who is without limits.
Beautiful, Rabbi Nadia. Always so appreciative of your articulation of very complex ideas. I think I almost got it there, so that's beautiful. Thank you. Jason, thanks so much for being a part of a lot of the conversations that we've been having. And so welcome. Thanks for talking from the Baha'i tradition, which has been such a great supporter of IPP in this work. And if you want to hear more from the Baha'i tradition, go on to their website. They did a whole series on it 2 days ago. And so Jason's going to give us a little taste of that. Thanks for being here, Jason.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. I'm so moved by all the comments that everybody has made already. And, everybody here on the panel is a teacher. I must say I'm only a student. So I'm sharing what I know and what I've learned, but I am just so proud and honored to be here. And the things that I'm going to talk about, I think will, not surprisingly, will have connection to many of the things that have already been said. And that shouldn't surprise anybody that knows a little bit about the Baha'i faith, because the primary message of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, is that the source of all of these of all of our religions is the same. There is one source. That source, the creator, God, the universe, has revealed itself throughout history and will continue to in the future as well. And that this stage that we're in now is the next stage of humanity, where it involves the unification of all the peoples of the world in one common fellowship, and all the peoples of the world valuing and coming to the realization of their oneness and their connectedness, and valuing every religion, race, people on earth. So ultimately, when we talk about emptiness from a Baha'i perspective, it's about two things. It's about our individual relationship with the creator, with the universe, and it's also with our connectedness. Many of the people that have really done deep mindfulness and meditation and have spent so much time doing this, it's so amazing, no matter what tradition they come from, that they often come to this very similar realization when they truly can do it. And I must say, I haven't gotten to that deep place that so many have, but when they do, they come to this realization that all things are connected, and that they feel connected to all things. And what the Baha'i teaching, in that the way to achieve that, emptiness, and that emptiness is first through detachment. So there are two veils. Baha'u'llah says there are two veils that keep us from that level of realization, and they are one, our self or ego, or selfishness, and then the other is our attachment, or our desires. And so learning to identify those and in a sense kind of externalize them is where we can come to these kind of realizations. So the Baha'i faith refers to this search for this kind of emptiness. There's the mystical writing of Baha'u'llah, the Seven Valleys, is really the most well-known mystical work in the Baha'i faith, and it has connections to the traditions of Sufism and Rumi and some of the other Islamic and other mystical traditions. And so it often talks about this search is compared sometimes to the lover and the beloved, Like that's the journey that you have to go on. You have to have that sort of passionate, in one sense, desire for this kind of emptiness and oneness and connectedness. And yet, in the same time, you have to be able to detach from sort of the material things and the material expectations that we all have. So that lover and the beloved is a beautiful metaphor. And one of the stories is Layli and Majnun. You may have heard this in sort of mystical poetry, where there's this beloved is in search of their lover and gets chased by the police and is going away from what they think of where the beloved is. But in running away, he scales this wall and ends up in a courtyard, and right there is the beloved. And so I think it's a metaphor for a lot of times it's the things we have our own expectations of what our journey looks like. And sometimes our attachment to those expectations is the biggest obstacle to achieving whatever our even thinking of achievement as a thing or a destination. So those are part of the teachings. It focuses on simplicity, but not asceticism. Leonardo da Vinci said, simplicity is the greatest sophistication, and it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to have simplicity. That's the sort of the aesthetic, I think, that the Baha'i faith believes in, this idea of emptiness, asceticism, and of course, you know, the Buddha has wonderful teachings about this, speaking of the middle way, middle path, that, you know, asceticism, if you weaken your body, if you don't take care of the parts of the material needs that you have, then that also becomes an obstacle to, you know, the true path. But really that idea, I mentioned decloaking out of your sort of self and ego, that's the hardest part for all of us. And prayer and meditation are the ways that in the Baha'i teachings that we can do that. And there are a number of prayers and teachings that help with that. And one of the things that we discover when we do that, this 7 valleys that I mentioned, the final valley is the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness. And nothingness there equated to emptiness. That's the ultimate destination, if you will. But there's another work by Baha'u'llah called The 4 Valleys that talks about different paths those are just 4 different paths to the same destination. So the idea is not to get attached to the forms. I think similar to what Justin was saying, we have to also be careful when thinking about these things, not to be attached to the forms of the way that we do it. Those things can become obstacles in of themselves. And ultimately, one of the realization that one comes to and the sort of part of the journey, maybe the most valuable and important part of the journey is this realization of the love of God, or that's part of that. That's one way that the Baha'i faith says it. You could also think of it as our connectedness to all things is, you know, those are equated in one sense. And that is expressed in the fact, I think of also another connection to it is the scientist, Carl Sagan, once said, "We are a way that the universe knows itself." And that's very similar to, so in a sense, the universe, when we become empty and we then the universe kind of expresses itself through us, you know, the universe or God or the creator, however you prefer to think about it, the universe is then expressing itself uniquely through every individual. That's sort of the one side of it. The other direction, and Baha'u'llah says that, you know, every human being has within them the ability to express all of the attributes of God, compassion, justice, unity, all of those attributes. So that is where the push and the pull of this is, and these are sort of 2 sides of the same coin or different ends of the same sphere. And then the last insight that I'll share on sort of the Baha'i view of this topic on emptiness is, and this is a connection between Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, and what Rabbi Nadia was expressing. And then also in the writings of Baha'u'llah said, "Praise be to God who hath made being to come forth from nothingness." And when you think about that nothingness, there's a tremendous amount of creativity in nothingness, in emptiness. And there's, when you get to that, that place of emptiness, of nothingness, then you become, in what some of the Sufi poets talk about, the flute or the reed. You know, when you become empty, then the breath of the beloved, or, you know, you could call it the winds of the universe, blow through you, and they produce this music that is uniquely you, and that only you can uniquely express in a sense, the universe itself. And so in emptiness, in nothingness, there's a tremendous potential for creativity and innovation as well. And then the last thing I'll share is just this quote from the work that I mentioned, the Seven Valleys, from Baha'u'llah, where he says, "After scaling the high summits of wonderment, the wayfarer cometh to the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness. This station is that of dying to the self and living in God, of being poor in self and rich in the desired one. Poverty, as referred to here, signifieth being poor in that which pertaineth to the world of creation, and rich in what belongeth to the realms of God. For when the true lover and devoted friend reacheth the presence of the beloved, the radiant beauty of the loved one and the fire of the lover's heart will kindle a blaze and burn away all veils."
Beautiful. Thank you, Jason. I love this imagery that's beginning to pop up. Is really, let's follow up on that, because this imagery is really rich. Thank you, Jason. And we may have we'll have opportunity for questions, in just a moment. So I'm going to speak from the Christian tradition. For those of you know me or don't know, I was ordained Presbyterian, and then kind of became agnostic, and then an interspiritual, interfaith kind of minister. But I'm deeply grounded in the Christian tradition. That's where my training has been. So I was really fascinated. This is one of the things that I deeply appreciate about standing in the Christian tradition, is that it has these, mainly I've stood in the mystical tradition of Christianity and the Gnostic tradition. And so there's some different types of theology and ways of understanding Christianity and Christ from different perspectives. And the mystical tradition is the one that I fall on. And this is what's called the Gnosis Theology. And I'll talk about that, but it comes from this understanding of Christ, or how Jesus became the Christ, that is not often talked about in mainline Christianity. It's been somewhat controversial, actually. But it comes from this Philippians verse, Philippians 2:5-8. "Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, counted it not a prize to be on equality with God, but emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, being made in the likeness of men, and being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself, becoming obedient even unto death, yea, death on the cross." So there's some different interpretations, but the word that I'm really interested in is this word emptiness. And that word is translated as kenosis, or and the Greek from which this comes is actually the word called, it's understood as self-emptying. So in this, this is a verb of the word empty. So it's emptying. It's the process of emptying out. So literally it is the self-emptying of Jesus' own will, or his own ego, or his own sense of a separate self, and becoming entirely receptive to God's divine will. So this gnosis, it is this paradox. It's the paradox of emptying oneself out of all of these things that you all have been talking about, right? Emptying ourselves out of the need to grasp, emptying out the need of us to have control, emptying of being careful with actual physical material reality. And as Geshe-la said, not seeing that as something that has substance or that's separated from everything else. So in this emptying of oneself, there is this filling of the divine spirit. And Rabbi Nadia, as you mentioned, that indwelling of the breath of God, because there was space. Without that space, without the emptiness or the no thingness of nothingness, there is the space for the breath, right? And also that reed image, Jason, that you use, that's really beautiful. So there is this, in Christianity, there's this sense that we can do some of this self-emptying, that there is a willfulness in our giving over or our letting go of or our sacrificing that allows the divine spirit to come into us. And in Orthodox theology, this is what's called the dispassionation, which I like. It's letting go of the passions, distancing ourselves from the passions or the attachments. And it's not saying that they're wrong. It's just saying that we have to make space for something else, which is the Spirit of God. Now, some people have said, and this is kind of my take on it, is that Jesus, in emptying himself, so Jesus as the human, in emptying himself, made way for the presence of God to indwell him. So in letting go of his ego, he found that he was filled with the divine spirit that was transcendent of himself, and therefore became the Christ. A lot like the Buddha, the Siddhartha Gautama was the human, but the title is the Buddha, which is the awakened one that happened in his enlightenment when he saw truth, or he saw the way things were. And I would say in the same way, Jesus, in emptying himself, became the Christ, the Messiah, that was fully filled with the presence and the Spirit of God. So in Christianity, there is this practice of emptying. And in contemplative prayer, there's often this, the giving over through mantras, through prayers of all of these attachments. And so I really like that we're coming up with some similar understandings here. Before we jump into conversation, I do want to show the Sufi tradition. Jason, I'm really glad you mentioned this. It comes out of the Islamic tradition. And this is a reading called The Guest House by Rumi, which I love because it's got this concept in it. And this is what I like is there's a Christian concept that we can empty ourselves. But in this writing, it's that we are emptied because of life circumstances. So let me read this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I love that poem and that sense of emptiness that feels painful to us. And it comes with all of this stuff that we would rather not have. But there's this idea of the sweeping of your house empty of its furniture, so that something new may arrive. Jason, like you said, like it makes room for the creativity. It makes room for something new to come, even though we may not want it, right? I'm going to end with, so I've gotten into this guy named Theory U. His name's not Theory U, it's Otto Scharmer, but he did this concept called Theory U, and this is a planning process. And it follows this process here. But I came across this language in his planning process called Theory U, that drops down on the left side through these practices of seeing and sensing. But I love this concept here, what he calls letting go. And if we're going to plan the future or be a part of the future as it emerges, he talks about letting go, which leads to this thing of presencing, connecting to the source. So we have to let go in order to connect to the deep source. And then I love the process of letting come. So again, this is guys from Otto Scharmer, but he's picking up on all of this language, right, that we've been talking about, of this emptying out that creates the way for the future to emerge. And that's what he calls it. If we're going to make room for the future to emerge, we have to let go. We have to empty out, and we have to connect to the source. So there we have it. So let's open this up. So if there are people that are on the Zoom that want to make, wow, we have a beautiful group of people on the Zoom call. I'll go to seeing all these beautiful faces. So feel free to unmute yourself, make a comment. If you're on Facebook Live, feel free to make a comment. And let's jump in. What's this stirring up in you? I guess that's always the great question. What's stirring up in you as people have been talking? So unmute yourself and jump in. Who's first? Don't be shy. I know things have been coming up for you all.
I'll maybe comment on one of your things, Jed, that maybe could get some of it started, since nobody ever likes to be the first one to, raise their hand in these things. You mentioned that Sufi poem. Thank you for including that. That was perfect. It does remind me of something in Baha'i tradition too, of like, if we knew the value that suffering and anguish, the value that they can have on our souls and on our spiritual development, that we would pray for them. I've never been that courageous, to be honest with you, to pray for them, but it does put it in perspective that, and there is an interesting parallel, I think, for those who are tuning into this idea of sort of the resources for the inward journey and a number of the other topics that Interfaith Paths to Peace is doing. It has some very practical applications in real life. I know a number of people that are friends of mine that are entrepreneurs. They talk about how, they hope that some of their people that have the best ideas and that are the most creative, they hope that they have some good hard failures as part of it. Because they always say, you learn so much more from failure than you ever do from success. You learn humility, and you also learn so much about kind of your own perseverance, but you also learn about the things that you shouldn't do. That we have pain in the world for a reason, that pain teaches us so much. And if we didn't have pain, and there are people who literally their pain receptors don't work, right? There are diseases, and it's a very dangerous world for them to live in, because they can hurt themselves and not realize it and not sort of change their behavior. And so I just wanted to try to connect that a little bit, what you brought up with pain, especially because we're in a world that's going through so much pain right now. And it's very, very difficult to find the meaning in much of it. And so that made me think, really about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. And not Justin, sorry, Jason. And there was a question in the chat box that I wanted to respond to that kind of builds on what Jason was saying. The question was, can you share some spiritual practices that help you get to this place of emptiness or nothingness? And certainly meditation is one of them. And there are a lot of different ones within Judaism in addition to meditation. But one that I was thinking about comes from the notion of study and learning. So building on what Jason had to say, how can we find learning even in those things that are the hardest? And Judaism, traditionally, we are supposed to study from many different perspectives, and we're never allowed to study alone, because that only can reinforce our narrow perception that is the perceptions of the ego. We always have to see things from other people's perspectives. So we always study what's called chavruta, at least 2 by 2. And when we study even 2 by 2, what we try to do is we try to see things from many different perspectives. Our sacred text, the Talmud, has like 45 different arguments, and everyone has a different perspective. And there's almost never, and the end result is X, because it doesn't actually matter what the end result is. Just trying to see it from every different perspective. It's like the hardest algebra and calculus class you ever took, where your head is spinning at the end of it. And that experience where your head is spinning at the end of it, that's where you come to the limits of your brain. And when you come to the limits of your brain, at the limits of the yesh, at the limits of what is you, and that's when you can begin to do the true learning, which is to expand beyond the ego and the self and what you understand, to see things from other people's perspective. And that's where we can enter into the emptiness that is everything, because Ein and Ein Sof are related. They are the same, as I had read earlier. And that's when you can have true compassion to understand that we are all one, and that the divisions of this world, the identities of this world, the ego of this world, that is really just an illusion. When we can see that and we can learn from that, then I pray there will be more peace, because right now we see too often only from our own perspective.
And there's another, I mean, we've invited these wisdom traditions in, but from the scientific tradition, at least in the quantum physics, and I'm not, this is not my tradition, so I may be speaking, probably am speaking way beyond my knowledge, but there is this concept or this image of the pregnant void that is reality. So that we can't see it, it's no thingness, but it's pregnant with everything. And I think that's a scientific image, that reality is this pregnant void, where we don't see anything, that we can't measure it, we can't find it. It doesn't arise in our sensory perception, so we can quantify it, and yet it's giving birth to everything. So I think there's this emptiness in this image of the pregnant void that's really an evocative image of this emptiness that we're talking about. What else? Everybody jump in. Let's keep it going. What do you got? I know there's some thoughts out there. Somebody else jump in with what's coming up for you. Anybody?
Hey, Jed, it's Ida.
Hi, Ida. Welcome.
Thank you, all the speakers, for the great information and the different perspectives of practice. I'm deliberately sitting through this talk, listening with this sense of emptiness. Hence, I'm not too quick to jump on with my opinion, but what has come up is it feels like when we interact, it's the me and the my interacting with your my and me, right? But when we stop the me and the my stuff and we just do the I stuff, which is really all of who we are, it looks like this. It's just the quiet and the emptiness. And if we want to illustrate what that looks and feels like, pregnant with possibility. And I think that's what everybody was talking to today, all the pointers, right? We're looking at the finger and not the moon where it's pointing. Can we hold the space for the chaos that's happening outside right now without picking a side? That is going to be inherent with the me and the my, and where I come from, and the stories and experiences that make up the sum of who I am today. Yes, that's going to be there. But can we put that to the side just for a few and just hold the space and observe and witness? Because this is not going to be a quick fix, you know? We've got to sit with this and, yes, even maybe cry at what we see. for that.
Ida has faded into nothingness,
Can
which is the true wisdom.
Thanks, Ida. We
Sorry.
lost you there for a second, but I think we got you back. So, yeah, and I think these practices that came up in the chat, I mean, there's so many of these practices that are around silence, right? Because silence is what drops us into the emptiness or the pregnant void of the moment. And I think that's why there's so many of these practices that have to do with silence, just when you did it, like, right? So if we just sit for a moment. And if we can push our hearts open enough and our minds open enough, so without trying to control something, we can feel that kind of emptiness. In which everything arises. My voice arises, this moment arises, material reality arises. But that, what does it arise in is that emptiness. And I think just in that circle that you talked about, I think a lot of us are called to hold space so that what wants to emerge in the emptiness of that space is God or spirit or the future that wants to emerge. And so we have to learn how to create emptiness within us in order that it might be filled with what wants to be filled. Thank you, Ida. What else? Other thoughts, comments? Got a rich group of folks on.
I'll share one quick one on the how, so that the question on the how, really the simplest way is the oldest way that there is. And it's just to sit and listen to yourself breathe, you know, to just, and if you want to get a little more complicated, you know, count breathing in, count to 4, breathing in, count to 4, breathing out, number of times. But just the act of sitting and listening to yourself breathe is the oldest and simplest form of meditation and mindfulness, and finding that emptiness that there is. It's just so profound, the healing power that has. And I have to believe that that's why in almost all of the traditions, so much of like the Holy Spirit or spirituality itself, the metaphor that's used for it so often is breath itself. And so the breath itself has such a potent and healing power to it. So if there's anybody that's just looking where to start, that's the best way to start. Take 5 minutes a day and just listen to yourself breathe.
Thank you, Jason. So we've got a few more minutes. How about some other comments or thoughts? What, again, I'm always like, what's been emerging in you? Doesn't always have to feel like it's makes sense, but just tending to what's emerging in us really highlights the conversation, makes it go deeper.
And I have to say that when I think about making space and I think about focusing on breath, it's hard to do that and not hear the words, I can't breathe. And that's the reality of right now. And when we talk about making space for others and the need for us to come to an awareness that we are all interconnected, the need for us to see the emptiness of the yesh, of the material world, of the ego, of the slogans, to see behind our true humanity and our shared humanity. My prayer is that we will be able to empty, we collectively, especially those that have been perhaps most focused on themselves, will be able to hear the voices of those who have been silenced for too long, and that will lead us to more profound wisdom and compassion.
Thank you, Rabbi Nadi. Yes, I think that is what's emerging in the silence, or what needs to emerge in the silence, are those voices that have been silenced. Other thoughts, ideas, what's showing up for you? We've got quite a few good folks on the call. Please unmute yourself and jump in.
Well, I'm not anybody special, but
Not true.
For some reason, this session is making me think of the book and movie Eat, Pray, Love, where she goes to an ashram in India, and one of the first people she meets there is a person who's not speaking, who chooses not to speak for a certain period of time. And I'm just curious if that is kind of something similar, you know, to creating that silence where you don't speak, and what are the benefits of something like that? Does anybody have any input on something like that?
I'll just come from a layman's point of view on that. And what I think it might be pointing to is, can you be quiet to yourself? It's one thing, but I mean this first level of practice of not responding verbally, meaning not being reactive. But then there's that next level of how, when you sit quietly and thoughts come, because thoughts will come, are you okay with noting them and letting them go and see them go? So being quiet to yourself, not responding to those thoughts that come through your head. Are you even able to do that in your quiet? And say, even that can go. Hold the space. And more thoughts will come. And you can note and honor them, but then letting them go. Are you able to do that kind of practice? Because at that point, you're creating more space internally. Right? More quiet, more emptiness, more nothingness. And to Jason's point about being the reed, that is where the energy will start flowing and it'll come to you. It is said that you can never find the answer where the problem is created or where the question is asked. You've got to step outside of that space. And so, yes, the questions will come and the thoughts will come and the wanting to do things will come, but can you let that, even that go? Can you get so small that you become unseen? This, the idea and the concept of who you are. Can you even let that go? And just a little bit at a time. Because if I come at you and say, let your ego go, you're going to go, whoa, the ego's going to go, what are you talking about? This is all of who I am. But just for little bits at a time and let even that go. You know, Baba Ram talks about how he got so ludicrously high one time at a friend's place, ended up by himself. And this voice was like, can you let go of all your accolades? And he's like, yeah, I can let that go and still survive. And it says, all right, can you let go of this and your titles and where you live? Can you get rid of your body? And he's like, no, I think I'll hold on to my body so I can keep playing. But everything else can go, right? It's sort of that kind of thought process with yourself and just go quiet. That's really what meditation is and what prayer is asking and then letting it go.
Your insight has helped me. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Hey, good afternoon.
Beautiful.
How are you guys?
Welcome.
Sorry,
Yes.
I'm joining a little late. My surgery went a little long, but Puna was on and I jumped on. I pushed her off. Is it okay if I share my screen? There's a passage, maybe 2 paragraphs by Baha'u'llah that talks about this observing silence and idle talk. You guys mind if I share that?
No, I just let you have the screen. So yeah,
Okay.
Share away.
All right. And let me see. And do you guys see my screen there?
Yeah, if you can make it a little bit bigger, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Did it get bigger?
It got longer, didn't necessarily get bigger. If you can.
Okay, let me see. I think I know how to do that. Yeah. Is that better?
Better, but still a little small.
Still small. Oh, okay.
Pretty close, but almost.
How about there?
There you go. We can.
All
I think
right.
we can do that. Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna read these first two paragraphs, if that's okay.
Please.
It says, "O my brother, when a true seeker determineth to take the step of search in the path leading on to the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, he must, before all else, cleanse his heart, which is the seat of the revelation of the inner mysteries of God, from the obscuring dust of all acquired knowledge and the illusions of the embodiments of satanic fancy. He must purge his breast, which is the sanctuary of the abiding love of the beloved, of every defilement, and sanctify his soul from all that pertaineth to water and clay, from all shadowy and ephemeral attachments. He must so cleanse his heart that no remnant of either love or hate may linger therein, lest that love blindly incline him to error, or that hate repel him away from truth. Even as thou dost witness in this day how most of the people, because of such love and hate, are bereft of the immortal face, have strayed far from the embodiments of divine mysteries, and shepherdless are roaming through the wilderness of oblivion and error. That seeker must at all times put his trust in God, must renounce the peoples of the earth, must detach himself from the world of dust, must cleave unto him who is the Lord of Lords. He must never seek to exalt himself above anyone, must wash away from the tablet of his heart every trace of pride and vainglory, must cling onto patience and resignation, observe silence, and refrain from idle talk. For the tongue is a smoldering fire, and excess of speech a deadly poison. Material fire consumeth the body, whereas the fire of the tongue devoureth both heart and soul." So I thought that, that passage itself says a lot. We talk about how words can be sometimes worse than violence, physical violence. They really can impact people on multiple different levels, and how sometimes it's better in certain situations not to necessarily talk a lot and listen, listen to what other people, certainly in these times where Rabbi Nadia was saying about what's going on currently. Not all of us necessarily have to be at the forefront of talking, but sometimes we need to be there to listen to voices of people that are really hurting. That silence in itself helps them. They have something. There's a segment of our population that is hurting in a way that maybe some of us don't understand and will never be able to truly understand. But being there as a support, not necessarily by saying stuff, being there to listen to them and support their ideas and their vision of what is going on, I think is really, really important. When I think it was Mama Deb that asked that question, brought it up, it just reminded me of that quote of how the fire of the tongue can be a smoldering fire at some point, and we need to be very careful in our speech. I just thought I would share that.
Thank you, Mahan. Always appreciate your wisdoms and thoughts. So we're going to begin to close. We've got another conversation. Actually, at 4:30, you'll probably getting zoomed out. The conversation at 4:30 is who will we become, which is a really interesting question for our community. So we have some open dialogue and conversation in small groups about who will we become as a community. So you're welcome to stick on for those. But I do want to, if there are any kind of final words or phrases from any of our panelists, I'd like to kind of close with you all. So if our panelists want to kind of close with giving their final thought in 30 seconds, that would be great. And we'll, let's go backwards. So I'll give my final thoughts. I was really struck by the reed image of being hollowed out, so that the divine breath might flow through me. So that's what I'm gonna go with. And then we'll go, Jason, to you, and then Rabbi Nadia, Justin, and end with Geshe-la. So Jason, you have final thought?
My final thought is mostly just to thank all the other panelists. I'm so moved and yeah, touched by the words of everyone else on the panel, learned so much. I guess the last thing I'll say is how impressed. One of the most powerful things, I've read a lot the last couple of days, and one of the most powerful things that really touched my heart was actually what Rabbi Nadia's prayer this morning in the gathering with Mayor Fisher. So heartfelt and connecting, the experience of what's happening now with your own experience, Rabbi Nadia. So thank you so much to you for that. And if anyone has not read that, please go and read that. If you don't read anything else today, I would say read that. And I think it will really help. And that's available on the IPP page. It was reshared there earlier today. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you,
What
Jason.
a great setup, Rabbi Nadia.
Thank you, Jason. I'm humbled by your kind words. And it's hard for me to talk about anything else. My first instinct about even this panel was it's all emptiness and nothingness, and we should all be out protesting. But I realize that not everyone is in that place. And one of the things that I value about Interfaith Paths to Peace is the ways in which we give different people different voices, and we encourage dialogue and self-reflection. And my words this morning in my prayer were based on my own self-reflection and a prayer that we start listening to voices that have been silenced for too long. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, as part of our new program, we have soul food for the city. And what we're going to be doing is normally we're going to be highlighting chefs and artists and musicians. And tomorrow we have the first African-American poet laureate of Kentucky. And he is going to be sharing some of his poems that he has been writing over the last several days. So I really hope that you will make space to hear him tomorrow at 3. And really, I think the task of emptying ourselves of our ego, of our need to be right, of our need to justify and dig in deeper, to dig our heels in and instead let go and let God and let truth and justice finally prevail instead of empty words, when we can realize that the true emptiness is the one that is boundless, and may that lead us to boundless compassion.
Thank you. Justin, final checkout?
Oh, gosh. I think that change comes through focused intention and relationships, and I don't know, we all have to be in it together. And so I'm grateful for the work that everybody's been doing, and just to be on the panel and to recognize that there are practices and there are things that we can do to bring this forward into the world. So thanks.
Geshe-la, you started us, and we're going to give you the final word. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. I'm Sam. Actually, it's great to listen you all the experience. And the same way, I just trying to do more focused practice. Right now, what we need, the understand reality, human relationships, and also compassion, loving kindness is true compassion we need right now. That is, the way I believe to my tradition is the how much you can to development is wisdom, and then will be we find the truth, and then we can, work together, and also prayers. And thank you, really great for you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la, and thanks so much for the presence and space you all are holding in our community. I know that you and the other monks continue to hold us in your prayers and thoughts, and I can only imagine how much worse things would be if we didn't have people like yourself holding us in deep prayer and thought all day. So thank you for that, that you bring to our community. So a deep bow to all of you on the panel for the wisdom that's in our community. Interfaith Paths to Peace is deeply connected. Everything we need as a community is right here. We just have to be more connected to ourselves. So this is a way we can do that. And so the wisdom in our community is deep and wide, and we definitely need it in this time. Thank you all for being on. Thank you, panelists. Thanks for those who joined us on Facebook Live and on Zoom. And if you're wanting to have more conversation about what's going on and how you're feeling in some ways of organizing ourselves, this next conversation at 4:30, Who Will We Become, will be a great space. But until then, we'll sign off, and thank you all. Peace be with you.